Now a word from Jason USA, CEO of Chibson USA, proud sponsor of Meaningful Times with Friends.
If you play guitar, chances are you're doing it wrong. Studies have shown that if you use a small pick, you're 10 times more likely to hate tone. By 2025, small picks won't even exist anymore. Chibson and Dunlop have teamed up to bring you the mini jumbo handpick. Size actually does matter. If you go on stage with one of those small picks, no one's going to take you serious. And everyone knows small picks are going extinct. You call yourself a tone chaser, yet you have one of those small picks? Get chased by tone with the jumbo handpick.
For more information, you can go to Chibson.com for all of the products, such as the new mini jumbo handpick, as well as the wild whammy bar, and I hate commercials. Get the Chib grip, for tone, and the humbuckle as well. You can also follow Chibson USA on Instagram or TikTok. So before we go any further, we need to have a disclaimer. The San Francisco Doom Tour that was discussed as approaching the date of the Doom Tour was then canceled. So it wasn't because it tried to sexually harass somebody or anything. No, it was canceled out of cowardice because the guy wanted to remain anonymous to present it and didn't. And then on top of that, they then outed themselves. Resigning, sending a letter to Mayor London Breed and resigning from their position for the something with letters. I don't know what it was, but they outed themselves. And in place of the Doom Tour, we had a carnival out there. But that was just the update before we get into this episode. Meaningful Times with Friends. This is episode 9 now. This one's coming to you, if all things work out, a week right after the other one, because no one cares. But point being, we're going to have these pretty close together. But we're back. I'm me and Dave. We have Jason, Nathan from Newark, and Ramshackle Dan.
I'm having camera issues again. I apologize. I know we're not on apologies yet. I kind of jumped the queue, as they say across the pond. Yeah, I'll try and get this resolved. But right now, I don't have control over my camera. I don't know if it is a deep state hack or just your typical technical issues from someone, a Gen Xer, But I wouldn't be surprised, since I've been dropping truth bombs for 7 episodes, that the deep state hasn't infiltrated my network just to throw me off their scent. But don't worry, I'm going to keep focused, and hopefully Jason will keep focused too.
All right. Well, good. Thank you. We did got that apology out of the way. We have no apologies this week because we haven't had a chance to do anything to apologize for yet, I guess. But yeah, our first topic of the proceedings today is actually something we're actually kind of topical this week. Recently, someone unfortunately did what people do. They died. Lost Paul Rubens, aka Pee Wee Herman. And oddly enough, for a guy who not only had a beloved character that was very popular and then somewhat shamed in the 90s, possibly one of our first examples of cancel culture in a manner of speaking. He was caught in a porn theater in Florida by a police officer who saw him, recognized him, and decided he wanted to get him in trouble, and followed him into a porn theater and caught him doing what people did in porn theaters in the late 80s to early 90s. And they arrested him. Can you imagine if that happened today, though? With all of the uproar over, the children. I'm actually surprised that people didn't give him more of a bad time. But
well, I think it depends on which movie you got caught spanking it to. So like if today you got caught in in an adult theater, I don't think it'd be that big of a deal. Spanking it to The Sound of Freedom, I think you'd probably get canceled.
That's exactly what I feel that today's culture would relate it to, and I'm kind of shocked that people still were sentimental about it, with and even recognizing, oh yeah, he had that moment, and people thankfully didn't drag his name through the mud in his death. But what was really interesting to me was that just reminded me that Pee Wee Herman, aka Paul Rubens, has been this sort of a beloved figure that I know he was in his prime during our childhoods into our teen years and then carried on into our adult lives. So I just wanted to go around and he kind of touched upon too the circle of entertainers that we all enjoyed. He was very much friends, peers, and adjacent to Weird Al Yankovic, Judy Tenuta, Emo Phillips. And then further, like his reach of entertainers that he worked with, that maintained bonds with, was countless, and nobody had a bad thing to say about him. As a matter of fact, everybody commented what they will miss most is every day somebody had a birthday, he would send them memes and gifs and texts of just all kinds of stuff, flooding their phone with it. And then eventually doing a bunch of these like kind of pseudo cameos that he would send just for his friends. That were these incredibly moving, humorous but moving messages. So I saw a few of them that celebrities had shared, friends of his, and they were pretty. And seeing them now, you can clearly tell that he was kind of anticipating the end and took the time to let every friend know, hey, I love you, I think the world of you, and all that. So all right, so let's go around with the group. Thoughts on Pee Wee Herman, y'all?
I was outside watering some plants in the front of the house, and I was listening to a podcast, and I was sort of kind of just deep trapped in my head, just doing random household shit. And my wife ran out, and she just looked concerned. And I was like, oh no, what the fuck is happening now? Right? Like who died or what tragedy has befallen something? And she was like, oh my God, Paul Rubens has died. And I was like, oh, I thought it was going to be someone we knew or something. So yeah, I think, and then I started work, and through work, we have like a chat channel that we all communicate with, and it's all everybody was talking about that day. Yeah, I think his presence was extremely important, especially to Gen X people. Because normally when someone dies, it can either be a joke or people kind of passively, oh, that guy died, he was cool anyway. So I think his death for people our age just seemed like a pretty big deal.
It wasn't just our generation. There was like, I saw older people that were pretty sad about it. Other thoughts here? I'll pick motherfucker. I'll call a motherfucker out. Jason?
Well, I remember speaking to his importance. I just remember being in fourth grade. So I was like 10 years old when his TV show came out, or when the movie came out. I just remember every time the show came on, like actually being so excited. I would go to my friend's house, who lived a couple houses down, and we'd sit and we'd watch it, and then we would dutifully scream when we were supposed to scream real loud. And just the absolute madness of it was so wonderful. And then the movie itself, every one of us, all of my friends in elementary school, we all knew every word of that movie, line for line, and knew how to do the dance. And it was all consuming. Pee Wee Herman was all consuming. So, and growing up, it was clever enough to where it was still entertaining, and it's still to this day entertaining. I will still sit down and watch the Pee Wee's Playhouse show and enjoy every second of it. He really captured something really special, and it's a shame that he died the way he did.
Dan?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the perception outside of people like us who consumed a lot of his art. I don't hate to call it art because it sounds so pretentious, but I watched the show. To Jason's point, I watched the show. There's really nothing like it, and I watched it later as an adult, various stages of adulthood, and it has layers to it on how brilliant it is. When you're a little kid, you don't really understand what he's doing. It's still fun and entertaining, and then you get into like an adult, you're like, oh, this is twisted and brilliant. And so I think for people who just saw it on the surface, it's like, oh, this is weird, effeminate guy who kind of talks in a weird voice and whatever. So I think in that sense, he's underrated. And in another sense, like I don't know if anyone's ever milked like an over the top shtick for so many decades. Like maybe Rick Taylor, like that's the only person I can think of who really leaned that hard into that sort of suited effeminate shtick. But watching his one man show, watching different like iterations of his show, the comebacks, like it's brilliant. But I think he's simultaneously underrated and overrated. And he's obviously a genius. He's a great actor too, in terms of serious acting. Which, if you think about it, most comedians or comic actors have no problem moving over into dramatic acting because, quite frankly, it's very easy compared to comedy. And so, it was this anchor that he kept going back to, but he was able to branch out. So I don't know. He was brilliant and charming, and I think overall, I don't really care when celebrities died. I think the only person that it really bothered me when he died was Phil Hartman, because he was such an underrated genius and just consistent and versatile, and all of that, and the circumstances under which he died was like insane. But I mean, he's 70, life expectancy is around 78. So it wasn't, I wouldn't say tragic, but definitely like got several decades. Like the movies were brilliant. The Pee Wee movies are brilliant. The Pee Wee shows are brilliant. The Pee Wee one-man shows are brilliant. And the acting was solid. So just nothing bad to say about it. RIP, but it's not tragic. It's just, about that was time.
And for those who think it is tragic, it's still fucking tragic. All right. So
No,
I don't mean to speak ill of the dead, but I don't know if Big Top Pee Wee was brilliant. I do call that into question, but most of his work I do like.
One of the things about why it is kind of tragic adjacent. He did pass from cancer, but we didn't get to see what I would say is sort of like a geriatric era of Paul Rubens, because that's the thing, is you're seeing him right here in his probably 60s. And he looks fairly young. I mean, he's somebody that has managed to kind of sidestep the aging out that we see. I mean, he was playing Pee Wee Herman up until, for the most part, until his the last decade of living. And as you said, he was also a great actor. What's really strange is Pee Wee Herman kind of came into people's heads, and it was strange how he even showed up. It was like my first memory wasn't even his movie. Was he had a special on HBO that then the movie might have came first. Actually, it did, but I remember his special on HBO, which the TV show was an adaptation from, and it was like an hour-long special. And I remember just thinking, like, it didn't occur to me that this was unusual. It wasn't, and this is in the age where I knew that there were comedy specials, stand-up comedy specials. I didn't know what to call them, but then there were also, HBO would shepherd these spoken word things that looked like stand-up specials by guys like Spalding Gray and Eric Bogosian, which always confused me as a child, because I would watch them and I'm like, are they trying to be funny? Because these are just long stories, and yet somehow for some reason I'd still watch them. And then here comes Pee Wee along with a cast of people with supporting characters, having this show that just kind of came out of nowhere, and it just seemed appropriate, and I just accepted it, and I enjoyed it. And it's kind of interesting, as Ramshackle pointed out, this was a character that was very childlike, played by an adult, clearly with an intention of like appealing to just kind of the child and everybody, but then went on to make a program that was aimed at children, but was really for everybody, which, yeah, you don't see it very often. I would get a kick out of spotting him in other movies outside of the Pee Wee Herman persona, and then realizing, holy shit, that's Paul Rubens. And one of my favorite roles is in a terrible movie that I'm even shocked he was in. And I say terrible, like I enjoyed it, even though it was a terrible movie, was Meatballs 2.
Was that the one with the alien?
Yeah.
Meathead?
Yeah, Meathead. And he's a character. It took me like a few times to put it together that I'm like, that's Pee Wee Herman. I think John LaRoquette's in it and Richard Mulligan's in it. I mean, this was a movie that was it was one of those sequels that kind of like only found life on home video or on home box office or whatever, because the original Meatballs had Bill Murray in it. That was one of his early vehicles. And then he's nowhere to be found in this. But he plays a character who's wearing like one of those old pilot caps that he's wearing it the whole time. And he's great in. And again, it's just one of those things. He does excellent work no matter what the role is.
Do you remember him from the Cheech and Chong movies?
You know what? I never liked Cheech and Chong movies.
No, the Cheech and Chong movies are bad. But I think at the time when we were coming into weed smoking age, they were sort of at that time the only game in town with weed movies. But he was in a couple of them, and I think in one of them he actually plays a character on stage that he either calls Pee Wee Herman or it's a Pee Wee adjacent character within the movie. And that must have been like 80, like early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. So he developed that character like a long time ago.
Yeah, he's part of, what was it, the Groundlings? Yeah, it was the Groundlings. Yeah, he was part of one of the well-known LA improv troops, and I forget who his contemporaries were, but
Phil Hartman was in Groundlings with Phil Hartman at the time.
Cal Arts. He was at Cal Arts with there was some photos with him, and I think even like David Hasselhoff and somebody else. The thing in seeing these remembrances was just seeing the scope of how many people he really was friends with, and not through so much celebrity, but like he stayed in contact with people that he knew when he was, just a young actor starting out. I don't know. It's one of those people where it's like everybody was really bummed, and so it's,
Yeah, it's interesting because the 80s were such a shtick friendly era. And I think if he tried to do this in any other era as a starting point, I don't know if it would have worked and been embraced. But the 80s were so like ripe for being able to come up with, like Where's the Beef or Spuds MacKenzie, just some like wacky shtick that people would totally buy into. And then once he infiltrated the culture, and because he was, because it was nice, it was inoffensive. He's not like freaking Dice Clay, right? So people were happy to see them. He's from their childhood. And so every time he kind of re-entered the culture in this character, people were able to embrace it. I would say if you were to bring back like Mr. Bean, I think you'd get a similar response. I think Mr. Bean is like very obviously a shtick, kind of similar looking, but it's so inoffensive and so part of the zeitgeist that I think you can keep going back in. It's an interesting comparison between like Rowan Atkinson and Paul Reubens in terms of their ability to be very verbal or silent and be able to really excel in a bunch of different comedic mediums. I'm not saying like he's on the level of Rowan Atkinson. I'm just saying it's just kind of interesting when you see that you can go into this very, very iconic shtick, but you can go completely outside of it and be just as effective.
When you say Rowan Atkinson, the only difference I don't think Mr. Bean had quite the reach that Pee Wee Herman and Paul Reubens did. And I don't think Rowan Atkinson's really done much acting outside of Mr. Bean's character.
Oh no! You should see Blackadder. That is freaking genius, and it's entirely verbal. So you have something that is entirely verbally driven, which is like Blackadder, which also had Hugh Laurie in it for a while and Stephen Fry. I mean that show is freaking loaded and brilliant. And it's all like acerbic cut downs. He's like a miserable SOB traveling, like reincarnating through time, just being this really underhanded character. And then Mr. Bean, and then he's been in he was in Rat Race or something, right?
I'd say Rowan Atkinson. It'll be sad when he passes, but I don't think we're gonna. Jason, agree or disagree? Rowan Atkinson on the level of Pee Wee Herman.
Yeah, I think Rowan Atkinson is legendary. Outside of Mr. Bean, yeah.
Pee Wee Herman had a kind of a foothold into the kids for the most part, and adults, and kind of generations that grew up with them, as opposed to Mr. Bean. I enjoyed, but I don't remember shit about Mr. Bean.
Well, I think you might have a different opinion if you grew up in England.
Yeah, we didn't grow up in fucking.
I know, but I'm just saying that I'm not saying there are similar figures with similar trajectories and similar styles. I'm saying that yes, they are both legendary comedians.
Okay. Hugh Grant getting caught with the prostitute, was that on the level of Paul Reubens in the porn theater? I mean, we want to put that on
Not really, because Hugh Grant is an actor and acting is easy.
Rubens.
Well, no, he also wasn't doing children entertainment. I think that was sort of the dividing line, the difference between Hugh Grant and what Pee Wee was up to.
In the new Dungeons and Dragons movie, all right, that's aimed at all kinds of family fucking bullshit right there, man.
Well, don't forget, Dave, the legendary, the man who went up a hill and came down a mountain.
Yeah, whatever.
Do you think this is one of the few cases where a scandal like Paul Rubens was in getting caught jerking off in a theater? You think it actually helped him because he was probably going to be typecast as Pee Wee for a long time, so maybe it helped him break out of just being a one-dimensional guy.
I don't think anybody was really that shocked so much by the porn stuff. People were more shocked at seeing him with long hair and a goatee. That was like more shocking was the mug shot of like, oh my God, that is him. My God, what did he do to himself?
I used to carry that picture of him when he got arrested in my wallet. I don't remember if any of you remember that. I carried it around like it was a photo in my wallet because I was at the dentist office and they had a People magazine and it had an article about him getting arrested. So I ripped the picture out of the magazine and kept it in my wallet for like 2 or 3 years after it happened, just like a family photo, because I just thought it was he looked so awesome and just weird. I mean, he looked worse there than he did before he died. He looked so haggard and trippy.
He looked like a dude that was in the bar that he did the Pee Wee Herman dance, the tequila dance.
Like, he looked like a Satan's helper.
When he showed up at, I think it was the MTV Music Awards or the Video Awards, it was one of those big award shows, and he hadn't been seen in a while, and he popped up top at the start of the show. It was an announced that he was going to be there. He just happened to be there, and everybody cheered. Like it was so strange to watch in a live audience, and I think anybody who watched it at home was like, holy shit, it's Pee Wee Herman. And he had the best opening line, just saying, heard any good jokes lately? And that shit just killed. Just that first line. I don't remember how long after the incident that it happened. It was probably about a year at least.
Whatever it was perfect timing. I remember that. And the thing is, like, I don't think anyone really had a problem with it. It was one of those, like, we got to do something because to your point, he's a kid's host, so we can't just like let it go. But I don't think anyone was really mad. And then by the time he came back, it was like perfect timing when he was like kind of quiet canceled, because I don't think anyone really wanted him vanished from society. So everything worked out perfectly for him, except for, dying.
I think he consistently got to work. He got to bring back, Pee Wee Herman in a nostalgic sense later on. He had another movie on Netflix, but a lot of people didn't know his house was raided throughout I think it was in the 2000s around there. His house was raided for suspected child pornography. I don't know specifically what he had, but whatever the investigation was, his house got raided because of artwork that he had that was deemed child pornography, and it wasn't. He was exonerated from it.
I think if you are a grown man and your job is to entertain children, I think that's probable cause. Because I could see if you don't understand like his shtick or what he was doing, he kind of looks like a pedophile. And then if you look at the guy who hosted Blue's Clues, like that guy reeks of pedophilia. Like just any sort of middle-aged dude doing this, I think that's probable cause under the Fourth
So you're
Amendment.
saying Captain Kangaroo wouldn't fly today, huh?
No.
This is long after his show, though. Pee Wee Herman was not in the zeitgeist. All right. This is in the 2000s. Like I'm saying, it was something that came up. If you look it up, it was during a time when he was, I think it was long after, or years after Blow, even, he's playing a scumbag in that movie. So,
and Captain Kangaroo is elderly. So I think there'd be an exemption at that. I mean, if you're an old man, you're super elderly, like you'll talk to anybody, you'll do anything so you're not lonely. But if you're like a middle-aged man and you choose to spend your time with children, like I think that warrants an investigation.
So there's a window where pedophilia is most suspected, but the cutoff is like, okay, you're like 80 now, so you're just a nice old man at that point.
Yeah, I think so, especially because your testosterone levels are down. You're probably not super sexually active. So even if that's kind of your desire, I think it's fairly harmless. There's a certain time where you as a threat to others kind of expires.
Anyway, but point being, probably a big misunderstanding. Again, he wasn't arrested, he wasn't convicted, nothing like that. It was in the news, though. I remember reading about it, and it was at a time when Pee Wee Herman was not was rather dormant in the culture. So it wasn't like no children were harmed.
Another red flag is the bow tie. If you look throughout pop culture and somebody outside, any in the last 40 years is wearing a bow tie, they're up to something no good. Yeah. For the most part, I would say
Tucker Carlson for sure, right?
Right, that was the beginning of Tucker Carlson. Bill Nye's another one we talk about some other time. With they're just like it's trying to like show this friendly yet like intelligent shtick. So anytime you see someone who's an expert in anything wearing a bow tie, be very, very suspicious.
Okay.
I would like to speak up in defense of bow ties, just because my very close friend Harry often wears bow ties, and he is a sweetheart.
Fucking get him, Jason.
There's always exceptions.
There's exceptions, yeah. Harry, Orville Redenbacher, like there's exceptions.
Colonel Sanders, although he had kind of like I don't know, like a large bow tie,
and also he did some shady stuff too.
Slave owner with a black bow tie. That's
Yeah, there's a little of that.
All right. Well, I think farewell, the Pee Wee Herman, Paul Rubens. Thank you for entertaining us. Thank you for making us think too by being caught jerking off and then coming back into entertainment and all the joy that you brought to this lab, except for our one joyless member of Meaningful Times with Friends, who is suspicious of you. All right. Moving on. This next topic, this is brought up in the chat. San Francisco is kind of having some hard times. Ever since the pandemic, it's not exactly been the city it once was. But now, I guess there are some people who are doing a doom loop walking tour where they are walking to these, areas. They're taking tour groups through these areas of San Francisco to show them San Francisco at its, bottom, if you will. Who brought this up?
That would be me.
It'd be you. All right. So then go ahead. Discuss, kick this off there, Ramshackle.
I lived in San Francisco I don't know, for like 7 years in the 2000s. And one of the features about living there, one is the geography is very small. And so when the people talk about the destruction or the dissolving of law and order and the proliferation of fentanyl and homelessness, it is in very specific spots throughout the city. And it has kind of taken over the South of Market area, but you get used to it when you live there, and there is you develop a sixth sense. I think it's through repetition and recognition of what's dangerous and what's not. And so even when I go back, and I go back every month, it doesn't really bother me, but I do notice having the lens of going away from the state and then coming back every month, both Oakland and San Francisco, it is slightly getting more and more unruly, but I still don't feel like it's any more dangerous. And I want to separate that. So obviously the rules around decriminalizing open air drug use has increased, surprise, open air drug use, but not like an exponential way. It wasn't like they made some sort of decision and then it's always been there. It's become politicized nationally. And as an example of what happens when you go too far left wing with your policies and not prosecuting shoplifters and not dealing with your homeless and not prosecuting drug crimes. And drug crimes is a very double-edged sword. We can talk about that some other time. But these aren't people who are choosing to be homeless or people who just got kicked out of their house and they couldn't find their way back. And they need treatment, but you can't force people into treatment. And I do not want to force people into treatment because that's a slippery slope. If you just take it out of this context and then you take tourists who are shocked by this, and this guy has developed a walking tour. Obviously, this is the definition of exploitation. However, it is in the public, and I think it's just another tourist trap, right? Like, if you go to San Francisco, any of the tourist stuff is pretty much a shit show, like the double-decker bus tours, going to Pier 39, going to Fisherman's Wharf. Any of the tourist shit is pretty much sucks, and I assume this one does too. And any of us could take this tour for free, which is one of the things in the article is like, well, you could do this for free, but they don't know. So it's like any other tourism thing. This is now a feature of the city that has national notoriety. So I'll say this because typically I don't introduce a topic. if you're to talk about the two main issues that have gained national notoriety, other than shit on the sidewalk, it's the rampant homeless slash open air drug use. But I think that's one thing. That's one solitary topic is drug use, or interdependent topic, drug use and homelessness. And the other one is the decriminalization of petty crime, which undeniably has resulted in two things. One is the closing or altering of hours for a lot of retail stores like Walgreens or Target. And the other, and this is probably the more disturbing trend for me, is the proliferation of armed non-police security guards. And as a former security guard, this is not the population you want standing around with a gun. If you start talking about like how did it get to this point where crime was so rampant and unstoppable, I blame cyclists. If you think about it, like back in the day before it was like this, like jaywalking's always been a problem. Like who cares, right? It's decriminalized, whatever. Like it's just walking across the street. But if you want to talk about like cyclists are supposed to follow the DMV laws the same as as cars. And these assholes have been basically thumbing their nose and flipping off society, not obeying laws, causing a lot of traffic problems, and then culminating in this jackassery called critical mass, which is a protest without an end game. It's just a bunch of assholes getting together and like creating this self-indulgent anarchy with no end. They're just people who are assholes wanting to be assholes. And I have run into these people. I live there saying, hey, just curious about critical mass. What's your end game? What do you mean? Like, what does victory look like? So when you win, what does society look like? What do you mean? And it's just like, if you ever witness it, and I've witnessed it a bunch of times, it's just a bunch of people acting like assholes. So these are affluent people, or, you know, people coming from good backgrounds. And then now you just fast forward. That's like, these are the people that fissured the social contract. It's the cyclists, right? Who've always like lived in this like comfortable tongue-in-cheek anarchy, but very safe. And now it's like, okay, well, this is the example of like what happens when you don't follow rules. You just take the rest of society, people who actually need a little leg up in society, and you've just role modeled this with your affluent class, and now it's completely dissolved into some form of anarchy. And you know what, Jason, I hate to do this, but I'll say dog owners too, just completely like saying fuck you to leash laws, right? Like there's off-leash parks, but in San Francisco, everyone knows every park's an off-leash park. And if you tell someone to put their dog on a leash, they will look at you like you're fucking insane. So between cyclists and dog owners, like they're the tip of the spear to the complete disintegration of the social contract. And I'll say, you know what? You reap what you sow. You can claim George Soros and these fucking like activist DAs. No, it's cyclists and dog owners. Anyways, what do you think, Jason?
I think it's very interesting that you backed into this axe to grind with bike riders and dog walkers without leashes. That's really funny. Okay, so here's my kind of boring, complicated.
Oh, it's been boring already, man. Go ahead.
What we have with this Doom Loop walking tour, it's all actually north of Market, technically, but it is in the same district that I live in, which is south of Market. It's all District 6 is the bulk of this walking tour. This whole thing is really frustrating to me because this attitude is spawned of people looking at the homeless and drug problem as an aesthetic issue rather than a humanitarian issue, where people feel like visible misery is something they shouldn't have to deal with. And they should just be, quote, taken care of. And the taking care of part is not really what they're concerned about. Have I frozen? It looks like I've frozen.
Yeah, but it's it's for what you're doing. That was a really good pose.
Yeah, well,
It really was. Yeah. Kind of Nixon-esque.
People they're not concerned with how it gets dealt with. They just want to lock everybody up that they think is an eyesore. And what happens is what has happened in San Francisco, the population of San Francisco has really shifted from human beings with living their lives in a city to a bunch of affluent tech assholes who've moved in and want their lives to be lived in a gated community. Basically, they don't want to leave their apartment, or they want to move to the city so there's the amenities of a city, but they don't actually want to interact with what a city is. And so they want everything to be delivered to their door. They don't want to have to step outside and see other people. They want a weird kind of vacuum to live in, and anything that impinges on that vacuum is undesirable. And so this doom loop thing, the doom loop walking tour thing, is an asshole who is kind of appealing to that demographic of people who want to who believe that, like I said, it's an aesthetic problem, not a humanitarian problem, and that these aren't people; they are an offense to the sensibilities of the people who are taking this tour. And it really infuriates me, because when I see people on the street who are living in tents right around the corner from where I live on my block, I see them as neighbors. I don't see them as threats or trash, which is what most people see them as. And it just, I don't know. I get a little incoherent when I talk about it because it pisses me off so much.
I don't feel endangered at all. Just having been around it, I feel like they're just keeping to themselves and if there's ever violence, it's against each other. Like there seems to be kind of inner beef within the community sometimes, but I never ever feel like threatened by these people.
Yeah, it's a lot of people. I think the people who feel most threatened or who feel the most in danger are the people who are walking around scowling at the people who are living in the tents, taking pictures of the people just trying to survive on a daily basis, to post to Twitter and say, look at this filth and disgustingness, and oh, my property value, and oh, my small business is being ruined by people don't feel safe. It's because you're talking about how unsafe it is. We have a mayor who basically ran on the city is unsafe and everything. We have a DA who ran on we got to get rid of this old DA and get a new DA in because we need law and order. And then they wonder why people feel like there's a problem in the city. It's like, yeah, you basically have been telling people for years the city's out of control. We need to do something about it. And then they get in and they're not really doing anything about it except shifting people around. The mayor, there are text messages from the mayor. I voted for this mayor. I thought she would be great, but it turns out she's absolutely terrible. There are text messages of her, like, immediately upon being elected, like, I'm having lunch in this area. There's a man sleeping on a bench. Take care of it, to the police chief. This is like the attitude that we've generated here. And it's just absolutely disgusting to me.
A low-key conspiracy theory, just like my Mike Lindell, Jenkins and Breed, they're fucking on the side. Those two are having sex. There is some serious civic scissoring going on there. I guarantee it. I can't prove it, but I know it's happening.
One of the things I feel that's happening with San Francisco in regards to this is San Francisco is being scapegoated for something that's appearing all across America. This isn't a San Francisco issue. Yeah, I just went to Montana. There are people living in tents in the cities in Montana, everywhere around the Bay Area. And more so since the pandemic. I go north of the Bay Area. I was riding for the first time the SMART train in the North Bay, right around Novato, Petaluma area. There's this one street that's right by the water that's just littered with all kinds of RVs and home and cars that people are clearly living out of in this one section that I know, I've seen places. I know that there's homeless everywhere, but this was clearly a spot that is no different than seeing a stretch in San Francisco, and it's everywhere. It's just easy to pin it on San Francisco because San Francisco's been a hub for a lot of behavior that appears like lawlessness. Nate actually just texted earlier, a text from family about Fresno. People from Fresno worried about coming here.
Well, it's not just San Francisco. To them, or to people who watch a lot of Fox News, I imagine it's the entire Bay Area that is living in this lawlessness. My mom is in her mid 70s. Her husband's in his late 70s, and they do old people shit, retired people stuff, like have a bowling team and stuff. And I think they were saying, "Oh, we're gonna go visit my daughter." My mom was saying her grandson just graduated from college, and they're having a party. And people were like, "Are you sure you should go to Oakland? I've heard that, it's lawless out there. You can get killed. That sounds crazy. Why would you do that?" And so I think the propaganda that people are getting fed about doom loop and, what's going on in the Bay Area is very effective. I think it's It is scaring the people it's intended to scare, for sure.
And it's not to say the problems don't exist and haven't worsened. I mean, the same thing happened. I mean, it was appearing in LA, where a lot of this stemmed from, too, was oddly enough, in the comedy world, when you got somebody like Joe Rogan, who has a huge reach, who is on a regular basis talking about his move from LA to Austin, and a lot of that comedy community moved there as well. You go to Austin, I guarantee you'll find a fucking tent city, and you'll find just as many problems. And I'm not saying, some of the policies here don't influence what happens. It's just, these are things that have been here. I think a lot of the blame is being placed on certain areas and their policies, when in fact, a lot of this shit happened as a result of the pandemic. I mean, it's aftermath of, we're not that far removed from 2020 and 2021 and the effects from it. I think we're still dealing with the aftermath of that.
But there's also the presence of armed guards, both in Oakland, I've seen in Alameda of all places, and in San Francisco. And that's not pandemic, right? That's in the response to an increase in crime.
The people that are actually getting hurt by bullets in these areas are not from armed security guards.
I know that. That's not my point. My point is the fact that these businesses have hired people with guns, which traditionally would not be a customer-friendly action in a gun control enthusiastic area like San Francisco. There is something with the crime uptick and the lack of being able to stop people from running in and stealing shit, that they're putting these people with guns there. So that to me is a huge sign, because when I'm around other parts of the country, I do not see armed guards at retail stores.
I just went to Target here in Fremont a couple days ago, and I noticed that it was the first time I'd seen this, that they had it used to just be the razors that were locked up, but now they have all of the shaving stuff, like aftershave. They have all of the toothpaste. They have all of the deodorant, all in locked cases. And you have to press a little button to have some attendant come and give you all that stuff. So I don't know what it says about the fact that people are stealing toothpaste and deodorant. Like, how big of a plague in our society is it that people are stealing like personal items? And what does that say? Is it that people are so poor that they can't fucking afford to shave or use deodorant? Or is it just some plague on our society and the people are immoral and just rampantly stealing from these big box corporations? Like, I don't know.
The people with guns at stores now, like, they're not there because of people stealing. They're there because there's a fear of somebody coming in and shooting the place up. That's why they're there with guns. Because they're not actually allowed to physically interact with people.
Right.
They're not allowed to touch anybody. So, like, I saw the other day a security guy with a gun get punched in the face by an unruly customer, and he couldn't do anything. He couldn't retaliate. He wasn't allowed to. All he could do is try to push the guy out the door. That's all they're allowed to do. So they don't have guns because they want to shoot people for stealing. They have guns because there's a pervading fear that somebody's going to come in with a gun and start shooting the place up. We all have to do like extensive training on how to react when somebody comes in with a gun and starts shooting people, like mass shooting training. That's why they have guns. It's not because of the theft. And as far as locking everything up, that is so ridiculous to me, because there are signs up at Target that say, we have everything locked up to make sure that everything's in stock for you. And it's like, yeah, it's in stock. We're making sure it's in stock by making sure nobody can actually fucking buy anything.
Well, and who's vetting these security guards? Someone was making the point that, you have these armed guys standing outside of buildings. Can you imagine taking someone's life because they stole some fucking mouthwash?
That's exactly what happened.
I mean, it's
a CVS or something downtown. Somebody stole some fucking candy bars and got shot and killed by the security guard who felt his life was in danger because the person was cussing him out.
I don't have any sort of statistics, so I'm not going to disagree with you, but it is odd that the armed people are in the same retail spaces that are experiencing the thefts, and they're also the same stores are locking up the merchandise. So I think it's more than an active shooter. Not saying that active shooter isn't a problem, but it's also ironic, right, that by putting more people with guns there, you actually caused a shooting versus deterring one. Can we agree on this, Jason, that having people who are not police with guns inside and outside of stores is a bad sign for whatever reason?
I don't think it's just a bad sign. I think it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
It's also a bad idea that, when kids go to schools and shoot up the fucking school, man. So, I mean, again, I feel like we're San Francisco, and it's trying to find solutions. Granted, not good ideas. Again, gets scapegoated for a lot of ills that plague everywhere. It's because it's a city, so naturally, with a lot more people condensed in an area, you can still go through some areas of San Francisco, and they still look as untouched by these problems as they did, 10, 15, 20 years ago. But just as Jason mentioned, when there's more and it's in the areas of where they like to go visit, they want to go frequent, whenever, you'll still see people with their kids and strollers. There's still people who don't feel unsafe in the city still being, what it is. But again, it's just more apparent and a lot more of, an eyesore or an ear-sore. I was just in there. I visited Jason at his job the other day. And while I was there, I had to say the security staff were being very polite to somebody who clearly had mental issues, who came in, looked like she wanted something to drink, and they were trying to direct her politely that the Starbucks would give her a free cup of water. And then she kind of was muttering to herself and then started kind of wandering around where clearly they were just like, okay, this lady's not all of her right mind. And they seemed to politely steer her back out because she wasn't there to shop. And one of them was one of the armed guys. He looked like a cop, but he wasn't. I mean, I was watching that in action. I mean, Jason sees more. It's uglier. And when it's uglier, again, it's easier to then do things such as this, have an exploitive walk that, I wouldn't be so put off by this if maybe it benefited the community in some manner, but it's obviously not. Somebody's, making some money off of other people's, misfortunes.
This is right-wing Schadenfreude, I think.
Yeah, it's the American way.
As the official spokesperson for the right wing and white America, Nathan, I'll say this though. I think people have been gaslit in the middle and even middle left. Like people who are affluent have a genuine fear of this, especially people like living in Danville or Pleasanton or some of these other places where they're not used to like a city. I think that fear and prejudice proliferates. It's the conversations I have with some more affluent left-wing people. They have the same issue. I think there's more compassion for sure.
At least verbally, there is.
Exactly, and that's the danger of painting this as a right and left wing, because I think there's a lot of left wing people who pay lip service to this shit and try to sound compassionate, but they don't do shit, and they're the ones that roll up their windows and lock their doors, like the beginning of Office Space, where the guy's like, we're like rocking out to rap music, and then he sees a black person roll up and he locks his doors and rolls up the window. The point is, it's not a right left thing. I think it's a rich poor thing, and also I've lived in the city, I live in the city versus I live in the suburbs, and I'm afraid of shit that I don't understand. And the fact is that it's not a good thing that these people live outside, and a lot of them are mentally ill, but they're also not, by and large, and you can always say an exception, they're not a threat to your personal safety. You can just walk around them. It's fine.
Well, it's important, I think, again, until we come up with a cultural building of character, we don't have a lot of recourse for taking care of people that can't take care of themselves very well. And we're conditioned to be very discompassionate when it comes to the plight of others. It's funny because, people are so quick to go to a GoFundMe no matter what their leanings are politically. But then as soon as they hear the word socialism, they think that communism's, coming for them as if it's the McCarthy era, 50s or whatever. And that people really have been dumbed down to where they don't understand exactly what socialism really means, what it is, and how it affects them. It doesn't matter even how intelligent you are, that it behooves a culture to have some social services that take care of people, the downtrodden. That a society is only as good as how you can take care of your sick and your ill and your downtrodden. And that culturally it benefits us all if we do have some aspect of looking out for one another. And as Jason pointed out, he doesn't see these people as a nuisance. He sees people that are living in tents outside of his home as his neighbors. And that's a fundamental point of view that is, in my mind, is healthier in the approach to this whole circumstance.
Here's the other thing, though. We do pour a shit ton of money into this issue, and we're unable to do it. And it's not because it's a conspiracy, and it's not because of communism. It's because that people in government are generally unable to solve problems. Like when you get, and especially a city like San Francisco or a state like California or a country this big, people who are able to get positions in government of influence are not there because they have a track record of solving problems. They're sociopaths that are able to manipulate perception, and that is their primary skill set. And so you give a bunch of people who are able to lie to you and manipulate you into donating money and then voting for them, and then you get them in positions to try and solve problems. And let's pretend they're actually trying to solve the problem. I don't think they have that skill set, because their entire lives have been about social climbing and manipulating people, not actually solving practical problems. And so I think that's the underlying issue. It's not a lack of funding. It's a lack of having people in place that can actually do something and say, hey, we have this problem. Like, what are some ways that we can solve it? Instead, they just do a bunch of stupid shit and it just gets worse.
All right. Well, whatever. This has been boring the fuck out of me. Where do we go now? We go to our song. Thank fucking God. I feel like I've been on the fucking Doom tour. And I think it's appropriate considering everything we've been talking about. Timely fashion. This week's song is Guns N' Roses' Sweet Child O' Mine, which is a song that marked the end of the glam rock, glam metal, high point of the 80s. And these guys were definitely products of it. The album was out for a year. The hit that made them what they became was this song, Sweet Child O' Mine. It was the first song I heard from Guns N' Roses, that's for sure. One could say it's their Smells Like Teen Spirit, if you will. The year that this album came out in 1987, but 88 was when this song had a video, and then the video went crazy, and then the other videos kind of followed from that album that also were popular. Watching this video once again, unlike Paul Rubens, aka Pee Wee Herman, I am absolutely not nostalgic for anything that I saw in this. And I remember when I first heard it, I remember thinking, I would much rather check out Wasp or Quiet Riot even. It's a ballad technically, but it's also like not a ballad because it does get heavy later.
Isn't this what they call power ballads?
It's a power ballad. I remember there was a recording guy that we worked with. It still is in the Bay Area in Oakland, Bart Thurber of House of Faith. I remember when he would ask a band, he goes, is this music for chicks or is it for dicks? They were aiming for chicks, but they also got the dicks, which they managed to take something that was already kind of had a reputation by bands like Motley Crue, Rat, all of that. But these guys somehow, looking at them, managed to like make it appear more authentic. They tried to look like they were in the Doom tour. They are all glam rock guys. Look at them, but there's a little more of an edge to them. So, and this was the song that really introduced them, "Sweet Child O' Mine." So yeah, let's go around here.
I was never really crazy about this song. I liked their more straight ahead rock songs. I mentioned Mr. Brownstone as being probably my favorite off of that album. I liked their more rock stuff. I didn't like their trying to appeal to the ladies stuff. Like the video itself is like there's filled with it's like them and their girlfriends like at the time. It's like much more. It seems much more trying to get laid orientated than trying to rock to me.
I don't mind this song. I remember when these guys came out, and for me at that age, it was just when I was starting to get into music. So aesthetic was super important. So this, the long hair and fucking jean jackets and shit would have turned me off right away. But I don't know. The song itself isn't bad. I've never even bothered to check out what the lyrics were about. So I was kind of surprised at how little this song actually has to say. There's like 2 verses, and then the rest of the entire song goes into Where Do We Go, right? Sweet Child O' Mine. And there's something about songs where blue eyes get talked about that I fucking can't stand. I feel like talking about a white chick with blue eyes is such a rock and roll cliche. I don't know.
Yeah, it is somewhere between a power ballad and soft rock, and that they have a lot of that. Like I think Jason's talking about, like Patience is another one. It's even more trying to get later. November Rain, Like November Rain is kind of similar to this one, where it has like a lot of like heavy guitar elements, but it's really just a soft. This one, the lyrics are like, to Nathan's point, sappy as fuck, to use a Nathanism. But and they're not really well written, right? So you have like I don't know, it's really, really super cheesy. It's just like a shitty love song. However, from a musicality standpoint, it's a really, really well written pop song. Like the intro riff in terms of soft rock, like is probably the most iconic riff in the soft rock genre or power ballad. The song construction is really good. Like everything's really hooky. It's catchy. The chorus is good. The solo going into that Where Do We Go, and then that weird freaking side to side dance that he was doing, like that was big shit for a while too. I don't know how that became.
I feel like that was somehow iconic for its time.
It was, but I think it was also drug induced. But it really is a perfect pop rock song. If the lyrics were better, I would say it'd be like an all time great song. But the lyrics are terrible. Like, what is an ounce of pain? Is it liquid or dry? Like, how do you measure that? And why not metric? That ounce of pain thing might be the most overlooked question, not just in this song's history, but in the history of power ballads and soft rock. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that.
The thing I always found about Guns N' Roses is that they managed they were perfectly marketed because they were dumb. And a lot of what is popular is inherently dumb. This is a band that when I watch that video again, the video is literally just them with their girlfriends just standing around. And as they are even in this video, their brand was looking bored. They're just a band that completely looks bored with themselves, even when they're, kind of, into themselves. The thing that they did differently than this whole kind of scene did, there was always a synchronicity with the bands of these from the LA glam rock era, where they, even though they looked kind of different, they all had like something that was unifying about them all. And when these guys showed up, they all look like they're members of different bands, which is exactly what was going on at the time. They have a word in it that came from a member that's no longer in the band, Tracy Guns, who went on to form LA Guns. But the band that was started here was with Tracy Guns and Axl Rose. So they were Guns N' Roses. With the rotating members of different bands from all over, when they kind of settled in with this lineup, they kept the name Guns N' Roses. To me, it just speaks to, with the lyrics that you just mentioned and all that this was a band that sort of had random vision, and it continued to, even after its success. It was the tail end of a whole genre of music from LA, and an attitude and a lifestyle that, people want to say that the bullet was put into that scene from Kurt Cobain and Nirvana. And I'm like, I actually think these guys had more to do with the end of it, not intentionally, but just that their expression of that scene was an exhausted decade of gluttony that had to have kind of a swan song. And so Sweet Child of Mine was like the perfect introduction to that swan song of something that was going to die out anyway.
Didn't Dr. Feelgood by Motley Crue come out in '89, like a year after this? So I feel like this and Dr. Feelgood were sort of the last hurrah of this scene, kind of.
Yeah, Dr. Feelgood. To look at that album, they thought this, and they still continue to, that this was going to live, they're going to live forever with this shit. And I just remember when I first saw Guns N' Roses, they looked like a glam rock band that got bombed out. Their wardrobes are all not matching or whatever, because like even, your Poisons, your Cinderellas, you're all of them. Again, these guys still adhered to the rules of glam rock. They still, look at them. This, as much as they're the bad boys, they all worked on their hair. This is a very cultivated look. They still were part of that whole thing that then what Seattle, not only a couple years later, was trying to thumb their nose at. And at the same time, it's like, no, you guys are just, you're now another angle of the same thing, because fashion comes in with all this bullshit. And as much as, even if you're trying to do anti-fashion, it's still a fashion. So I don't know.
This kept going though. So Motley Crue is probably like this part was like the fulcrum, but it went downhill even further. There was bands like Firehouse. Kiss came back without makeup to make really shitty power ballads. There was Slaughter, and then culminating, I think, with Nelson. I think everyone's like, okay, that's enough. Like when Nelson came out, everyone's like, okay, this is not rock and roll anymore. And then grunge happened.
Winger maybe caused grunge to happen. That could have been the last straw.
these bands continued just in a different style, even in the 90s, because even after grunge happened, you had your bands that were, I want to say your Candlebox was very much a post-grunge version of this stuff. You could have put Candlebox out in the 80s and it would have fit right in. And there were other bands such as like Silverchair and like a few of these weird, they were like these bands that were like, yeah, it was post-grunge, but they still had like a coiffed look and songs that if you just moved them a decade earlier, no one would have thought anything.
It always goes in this direction, though. It happened with synth pop, where it would devolve into like shitty pop, and then it went from metal that devolved into like shitty like love pop, and then grunge did the same thing, right? It went from like the Nirvana group, and then it went into the Pearl Jam group, then it went into the Stone Temple Pilots group, and it just kept degrading until you got to whatever Rob Thomas was.
All right. Well, I think, where do we go now? I don't know.
Is this where I accuse you of writing that down?
Jason's dick just woke up and walked away.
It's had about enough of this.
So I think that wraps it up. Any closing words? Jason, have you got everything you needed to say out?
Yes.
All right, good. Nathan?
I feel like I got it all in.
Got it all in there? I definitely know you did, Dan. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Again, please check it out. Tell your friends. If you don't like the show, tell your enemies. Make them suffer the meaningful times with friends. So without further ado, have a great week. Have a great life. Have a great whatever. Bye.